some time ago, had the opportunity to sit down and have a cup of coffee with a good friend. And my good friend had been through a lot in the last year. She had lost a loved one, lost a parent that she loved very, very much. She'd also gone through some difficulty and some transformation in her employment that was uncomfortable and really hard for her. And she wasn't sure that she could even continue with her job. She was just also struggling with some depression as a result of all the things that she'd been through. And I'll never forget what she said to me. She looked at me and she said, with all that I have been going through, I wrote those words down later, with all that I have been going through, I don't think I can go on. And she said, I've lost confidence and I feel like I've lost my way. I think there are a lot of people like that you know, and maybe even yourself. That when we go through hard times, and hard times happen to everyone. It could be a loss of a job, it could be a loss of a relationship, it could just be a bad medical diagnosis, it could be anything, almost anything in your life. Just a disappointment in life, that life didn't turn out the way you want it to be. And so often when that happens, we lose hope. We begin to doubt ourselves. We begin to wonder if we made the right choices in our life. And so when someone says to you, with all that has happened to me, what do you expect and how do you expect them to finish that sentence? I've lost hope. I've lost my confidence. I've lost my way. And usually what follows are some dark and some sad sentiments. And listen, it's understandable. It's just a part of life. It's not unusual. And if that's where you are, it's okay. But what I want to talk about today, again, is just something completely different. Because the Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, he uses that same phrase. And I couldn't believe it when I was reading his letter. In chapter 1, verse 12, Paul is writing to the church at Philippi, and he's talking about what he's going through. And Paul says, with everything that has happened to me, he actually says those same words. And you expect him to say in the very next sentence, I'm lonely and scared. I'm wondering if I've made the right choices. You expect him to say the things that we say. And he has every reason to. Go back and look at what he's been through. What he says with all these things that have happened to me, he's talking about some serious things. Go back and look in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and 12. He talks about his hardships. He was shipwrecked. He nearly starved to death. He floated abandoned in the middle of the sea for a long period of time. He was beaten. He was in prison. He suffered greatly for his faith and commitment to Jesus. And then when you read this letter, you need to know it's considered one of the prison epistles. When he wrote these words down on paper, Paul was literally living in a darkened dungeon, chained to a Roman guard, awaiting his own death. He had been sentenced to be executed to die for his commitment to Jesus Christ. Imagine that. Can you imagine what he must have been feeling? Every 12 hours being chained to a new guard and wondering where his life had gone. In fact, going to Rome, it was in Rome. He was in prison in Rome. Going to Rome was his dream. It appeared his dream had been shattered. So who would blame him if he were sad and scared? That's not Paul's perspective. Paul instead was just overflowing with something completely different. Instead, when you read it, he actually goes on and says, with everything that's happened to me here, everything that's happened to me has actually helped advance the gospel. Paul, in this first chapter, says that because of what's happened to him, because he got put in jail, because he's chained to a Roman guard, it's given him the opportunity to share his faith with the guard. Every guard that got chained to him in that darkened dungeon got to hear the gospel, one after another. And one after another, people were being influenced to meet and to know Christ. And he says in the letter that everyone in the jail and everyone in the palace was talking about him and talking about Christ because of this opportunity. It's amazing. Paul is basically saying here that because of his relationship with Jesus Christ, this love comes flowing out of him in spite of his hardships, in spite of his troubles. He has a joy no matter what. He has a love no matter what. I mean, wouldn't it be great to have that kind of joy? To have a joy and a love that was not based on our external circumstances? That no matter what we went through, we still had a joy that was down inside of us? And Paul says that when we have Christ, that we find that joy, that joy comes out of that relationship that we have with Him. Let me tell you about a friend of mine. Many years ago, I was a minister in Little Rock, Arkansas. And one of the leaders of that congregation, of all people, was named Joy. And Joy was a woman who was recently retired. And it's interesting because Joy was married to absolutely one of the most miserable, grumpy, disagreeable people on the earth. Every time I met her husband, I thought to myself, how can that woman be so happy married to such an unhappy person? But everywhere she went, she just had a joy coming out of her. She served in the church, and she was the main reason I went to the church. The church was in a transitional neighborhood, and she had a dream of building a multicultural church. And she put such love into that church that people were attracted to her just because of the joy and the life that was in her. And I remember asking her, how can you be so joyful when you've had so many difficult things in your life and have such a hard time at home? And Joy said to me, it's because of my relationship with Christ. One of the things I want to point out to you about, there is a difference between happiness and joy. Happiness and joy are not the same thing. Happiness will come and go, but joy is something that stays no matter what. Happiness is often based on what's happening to us externally, and it comes to us externally. But joy is something that comes from the inside of us. It's internal. Happiness is based on circumstances. Are things going well on my job? Or are things going well in my relationships? But joy itself is something that is based on Christ. Joy is not based on circumstances. It's based on a relationship with Christ, and Christ's love for us never, ever changes. The beautiful thing about having a relationship with Christ is that it's a win-win situation. That no matter what we go through, Christ has a way of helping us look at our obstacles in a different way. We begin to see how those obstacles for us become opportunities instead of hardships. That doesn't mean it's not hard. It doesn't mean we're not lonely. It doesn't mean we're not scared. We just know that God is able to work for good in all things and in all circumstances. And that's what the epistle to the Philippians is all about. It is the epistle of joy. 15 times in this letter, in its 104 verses, Paul talks about joy. And again, he's writing it from the place of extreme hardship. How would you rate the joy in your life right now on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being low, 10 being high? Would you say you have an overflowing joy? I would encourage you to read through this letter and invite Christ into your life to give to you His joy, His life. And that's a promise that He will keep.